sometimes what is difficult is that even when you've done a good race and maybe you finished 11th, I'm sure there is some great races from drivers a little bit further on the grid, but we don't necessarily see it. Sometimes in motorsport, that's how driver contracts get done because of the odd call that you've done. And it wasn't meant to be spoken about any contracts or something.
Hi, I'm Mark Priestley. I spent 10 years working at the McLaren Formula 1 team with the likes of Lewis Hamilton, Kimi Raikkonen, Fernando Alonso, Mika Hakkinen. But those are just the drivers. I also worked with amazing people behind the scenes. Adrian Newey, Ron Dennis. They all taught me valuable lessons that I now know are not just applicable to Formula 1. My mission with this podcast is to help you to think more like a Formula 1 team might think about the challenges you might face in life, on a personal level, on a business level, being a parent, social challenges that you face. I hope you'll take away some valuable lessons that will help you on your own journey towards high performance. Welcome to Pitlane Life Lessons. On today's episode, I've got Stoffel Vandoorne. He's currently a third and reserve driver at the Aston Martin Formula 1 team, formerly a race driver at McLaren through some very difficult years. And we talk openly about that period of his life, the lessons that he learnt from it. I was surprised to hear that he doesn't look back on that with a sort of disdain. He doesn't think about it as just bad luck. He thinks about it as an important part of the learning process that has shaped the man he's gone on to be. And he shares many of the lessons that he's learnt through Formula 1 and motorsport that may well just help you in your daily lives. Stoffel, thank you very much for joining us today. I want to talk about the life lessons that people can take away from the experience that you've had in motorsport, particularly, of course, in Formula 1. But I want to go back to where it began for you, because, of course, like most drivers, you started in karting. But unlike many drivers that make it to the pinnacle of the sport, you didn't come from a background that had huge wealth supporting you. And through reading through your backstory, it felt like a lot of your racing career had to be supported by winning, by earning prize money, for example, that then catapulted on to the next step. Is that an accurate representation? And can you think of what that has done for you going through the early part of your career?
That's correct. I mean, my family didn't come from a motorsport background, so I started pretty small at a local go-kart track near the town where I was born. So started to do, some small competitions in the beginning. Obviously, everything is for fun because that's what I enjoyed the most was racing my go-kart around the local racetrack. But then, quickly had to work up my way in the motorsport ranks. I managed to get a bit of funding from the Belgian Motorsport Federation, which has been, very supportive for young drivers, and they were looking to support young drivers in Belgium at the time to try and help them to the top. So they were a big role in that. But then along the way, I also always had a lot of pressure that I had to win the championships that I was competing in, because there was always prize money associated with it. And I really needed that in addition to the sponsorship that I had from the Belgian Federation to be able to do the next step every time. So I think it's taught me how to deal with pressure, I would say, from a very young age already.
Yeah, and I'm sure it has, because, your career may have faltered if you hadn't had those successes. And so particularly at the young age you were back then, it must have been huge pressure. I'm also interested in what that, how that's affected you moving forward in later life, what's your opinion on sort of the idea of earning your opportunities, for example. You weren't handed necessarily very many opportunities through that part of your career. You had to genuinely earn those. And I wonder if that's something that's ingrained in you today. The reason I ask it is because, I've got children, teenagers now. Sometimes there's an element of them appearing a little bit entitled, like they feel like they should just be given something, or an opportunity has not necessarily had to be worked for. I wonder if you feel very differently given your background.
I think it's something you start to realize over time, that in motorsport and also life in general, nothing is going to be given for granted to you. And I think people should just be aware that every opportunity you get, you should be grateful for that, but you should also try and grab it with both hands, let's say. And I think that's what I've kind of managed to do in my junior series is I knew I was racing for very good teams. That is still not a guarantee that you're going to make it. So you still got to work hard. You still got to show the performances on track. And, that's what I kind of managed to do year after year. And that really helped me to secure a link with McLaren, first of all, firstly joining the junior program there. But it also gave me the opportunity to join Formula One later with them.
Yeah, I mean, you had an unbelievable level of success through your junior categories, winning championships on a pretty regular basis. And it did lead to this amazing opportunity in Formula One, which I imagine was the dream right since the very beginning. I want to chat about your time, particularly your debut, the debut race, of course, at McLaren, where you filled in for Fernando Alonso. What I want to get out of that particular event is, because we know the way that it panned out, you scored points, it was an amazing debut. But what about this idea of being ready for that opportunity? Because it came out of the blue to some extent, but you're already the reserve driver. So in the back of your mind, presumably you've always got to feel like you're ready to take those opportunities if they do come along.
Yeah, it's true. And, being a reserve driver is kind of a tricky position to be in, because you never really know when the call is going to come for you to jump in. So you never really know what to expect and when it's gonna happen, and the chances of it happening are very minimal as well. So at the time I was actually in Japan. I was racing in Super Formula, another series. I was testing there up until the Thursday before the Grand Prix. I had no idea that I was going to jump in, but only Thursday late evening I got a call that Fernando wasn't fit to race, and massive rush to try and get a plane and to get to Bahrain in time. So there was really zero thinking time from my side to start my first Formula One weekend, let's say. But I think in some ways that might have helped me a little bit as well, because there was no time to worry about anything. It was just like, okay, send me all the information, send me all the manuals. I'll go through everything on the plane. And then after the flight, I landed 2 hours later. I was driving FP1 already in Bahrain. So I really didn't have any time to start worrying too much before it all kicked off, let's say.
Yeah, and I wonder how key that is, really, this idea of worry and overthinking, perhaps. I mean, you're in a similar position now. So you are a test, having gone through being a full-time race driver, you're now a reserve driver again. I wonder if you prepare today differently to the way that you were prepared for that first opportunity at McLaren. Did you learn something from that, from being thrown in at the deep end, that now informs the way you prepare in your current role? I definitely learned quite a bit through that. I've also, in the meantime, done 2 seasons in Formula One, and I've been racing in a lot of different series since, Formula E, World Endurance Championship. So I would say I'm definitely more mature than I was back then, but it was still a good lesson. I think, when you're thrown into the deep end, let's say, so last minute, I think it's just important to focus on the basics and not make everything too complicated. That it's not going to be optimal conditions, and I think it's just important to focus on the basics, focus on your driving, because Formula One cars, they are not easy to jump in and get the job done. Nothing really prepares you for those cars anymore these days. They're so fast, they have so much downforce. So it's really kind of focusing on the basics, I would say, if I would have to jump in right now. And I think that's probably great advice for life anyway. For people at home, of course, you never know when that big opportunity might come knocking. It could be a job interview you've been desperate for. It could be meeting someone that could literally change your life. These things can come along at any moment. And I think the idea of being focused on your own basics as a rule in general for life is a really great way to give yourself a stable basis, because you'd never know you're in a position where if the opportunity comes, you kind of know what the opportunity is going to be. It's going to be driving the Formula One car in a competitive environment. For people at home, it could be any of those things. So falling back on the basics has to be the best preparation, surely.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think, people always have this kind of perfect imagination of things, and the reality is that it's never going to be perfect. There's always going to be something happening that you don't want to happen, but it's really how you deal with those different setbacks, let's say. I think those are important to manage. And as you go through your career, you start to experience more of those moments, and you kind of learn from those moments as well, how to deal with that. And I think for a lot of young drivers, for example, early on in their career, everything goes smooth. They don't have any issues, but then they get closer to the top and suddenly they have a couple of setbacks, a couple of difficult races, maybe a difficult season. And it's really important that they manage to deal with those situations, because once you get to Formula One, the media is over your shoulders. Everyone is looking at you. There's no hiding out there, and you gotta be able to deal with all those situations.
Well, let's talk about that then, because you did get your big break. It was with McLaren, and an amazing team. We've both worked there at previous times in the past, but I guess unfortunately, to some extent, I'll be interested to see how you feel about this. You had 2 years at McLaren, which were probably some of the most difficult years that McLaren's had in its recent history. How do you feel about it? Do you feel like it was a great opportunity, or do you feel a little bit hard done by, like you had a bit of bad luck there?
I would say a bit of both. Like, I still feel it was a fantastic opportunity, because they supported me in my junior career in World Series by Renault, then GP2, and ultimately they gave me the chance to be on the Formula One grid. I think the only thing that wasn't right was that the car at the time was not a competitive car, and probably for McLaren those couple of years were some of the worst years in the history of the team, let's say. So that was tough to deal with. Tough to deal with from my side as well, because previously I was always in positions to win races, win championships. And then suddenly I find myself in an environment where that was not possible anymore. So going to a race weekend, knowing that, you're barely going to fight for points was quite tough, let's say, and took a little bit of time to adapt to as well. And obviously when a team is struggling, then there's a lot of things happening within a team. There's change of bosses. There's a lot of people going out, new people coming in. So it was a bit of a difficult time, let's say. But I think that phase of my career also helped me a lot for the future, let's say, in terms of what I've been doing after my Formula One part.
Guys, I hope you're enjoying the conversation so far. If you can take a very quick moment to like, subscribe, follow, leave me a comment or a 5-star rating, I would really appreciate it. It makes a massive difference to the podcast. Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, the tougher times always do teach us the most, it seems. But how did you manage to sort of adapt your motivation when you'd gone from winning a lot of stuff in your early part of the career to then getting to this big opportunity in Formula One, where the win seemed so far away and not really tangible? Inside, in your own mindset, you said it took you some time to adapt to that. What did you do to adapt to it?
It was finding a different motivation. Before, when I was going to racetracks, I was obviously motivated by winning and by being the best on track and by trying to win a championship. I had to look for different things, because I knew that winning wasn't possible. So I had to, kind of look at, okay, what is the maximum we can do this weekend? Is a point possible? Well, then we're trying, set a point as a target, let's say. So that is quite challenging, because you always, every driver on this grid wants to win, and they're used to fighting at the front. But to find these different ways of motivating yourself, I think, was a big key in succeeding, let's say.
I think it's great advice as well for life, because in the same way, everybody listening to this, they can't all be world champions, or it may seem so far away to become a world champion or to reach the pinnacle of whatever it is they're doing in their lives. But to set yourself these sort of smaller targets where you can hit them, because when you do hit them, when you score the point on those days or you get a great result, whatever that looks like, the boost and the motivation that comes from that sort of catapults you on to the next level, doesn't it? And that's how you gradually work back towards the front.
Yeah, you do. And every small result that we get, it's rewarding for everyone. It's rewarding for yourself. It's rewarding for the team. And sometimes what is difficult is that even when you've done a good race and maybe you finished 11th, it could be one of your best races, but you don't really feel that rewarded for it. And I think that's something difficult to take sometimes. And even the people looking from the outside, the media and stuff, they don't necessarily see it because it's only an 11th place, but that might actually be an amazing drive, some, great strategy calls from the team, and possibly the best result possible on that day. But you just don't really see the big picture. It's not a victory on track. So I think that's also sometimes difficult for everyone to deal with those races, let's say, because I'm sure, even these days, I'm sure there is some great races from drivers a little bit further on the grid, but we don't necessarily see it.
Yeah, I think that's so true, because the media doesn't latch onto it and we don't tell that story very well in Formula One or in sport in general. It tends to be very focused on the winners. I mean, let's bring it on to what you're doing now, because you're now part of a big project at Aston Martin, a longer term project, your new factory just coming online, lots of great facilities, major investment going into the team. You're there as a third and reserve driver, but you're also alongside somebody you've raced before, Fernando Alonso. I'm interested, first of all, in what have you learnt over the years? First of all, being a teammate at McLaren, but now again partnering up with Fernando. Somebody of that experience in Formula One, do you take things from them? I'm sure ultimately you'd love to take his drive because that's sort of the personal goal. But what do you take from him? What's it like working alongside somebody like that?
I mean, it's fantastic, and to be honest, in all those years in between, Fernando hasn't changed much as a personality, let's say, or as a driver. He's still one of the best on the grid, one of the most talented ones. And I think what is impressive with Fernando is his drive, his motivation towards the sport in general, let's say. And I think he also understands the big picture within a team. What is important for him to push on and what not to push on.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because you are, as I said, part of this bigger project, and there's a patience that has to be developed when you're in a project like this, because you are not going to go and be world champions this year. I'm sure you want to be winning races right now, but the bigger picture is that this is a longer term project, and the end goal is to get back to becoming contenders for race wins and eventually world champions. So how do you sort of develop patience as a racing driver when everything in your DNA is about getting to the front now and winning?
Yeah, it's not easy. It's tough. And, sometimes when you're going through a phase like that, you're thinking, look, I can't lose my time, like I'm this old. I maybe have a couple of more years to go. I want to be winning now, I don't want to wait. But, unfortunately in Formula One, everything takes time, and we can't buy time. And to make a winning organization takes a lot of effort. And I think from Aston Martin's side, we're really putting all the efforts there to make that happen as soon as possible. A new factory, a new wind tunnel, new simulator is all kind of coming through. The wind tunnel will be ready very soon. The new simulator will be operational quite soon as well. So everything is being lined up, let's say, to have a successful, or the possibilities to fight for victories and world championships.
Yeah, and I guess whilst you would love to have the success immediately, of course, can you take heart from other teams around you, like McLaren, for example, is a great example, who, back when you were there, they were in this really difficult time, quite a dark period in their history where they were right down the back of the grid, quite frankly. A few years later, they're now challenging for race wins on a regular basis. They have restructured the organisation in some similar ways that you're talking about there at Aston Martin. Can you take heart from seeing other people around you have success? And it gives you a glimmer that it is possible, I guess.
Yeah, you can definitely see it's possible. McLaren, beginning of last year, were struggling a lot. They restructured a lot of people within the organization, and suddenly the system started working again. And that's great to see, because that means that, it's possible to do that in any team if, you have the right people on board, if you manage to unlock their potential, because I think that is something that is underestimated in big racing teams, is how do you unlock the best potential from every single person in the organization? Because you might have incredibly clever people. If they're not put in the right role, in the right position, you're not going to extract their potential. So I think that's a very important part that a team needs to focus on. So there's definitely hope, and I think it's it should be an inspiration for everyone to keep pushing, to keep developing in the right way, and then it shows that quite quickly you can get yourself back on the right track.
And how are Aston Martin doing exactly that you just said? Making sure they've got, first of all, the right people, and we know that a lot of people have come in, some new hires, great appointments. But how do you get those people working in the right way with each other? Things like the new factory, the new facility, the campus that you've got there at Silverstone, even structuring that and the way that it's built, the way that people flow around the building, these things can all make a difference to how people interact, can't they?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the new factory is definitely a big part of making people work closer together. The old factory was becoming way too small. The team has grown to over 800 people now in the last year or so, and the new factory being able to use the new factory really enables for people to be closer together. The way that certain offices are designed is so that people from a similar department are able to communicate with each other much better than they were in the past. And there's nothing like the old coffee talk, let's say, just grabbing a coffee together. Yeah. I think it's sometimes important because that's, you're not behind your desk, you're kind of in a more relaxed environment. People can have a kind of a normal chat, let's say, over a bit of a break. And I think sometimes ideas flow that way or start flowing that way. So everything is kind of being put in place to make the working environment as nice as possible, as friendly as possible, and make sure it works out for them.
It's so true, isn't it? Sometimes the best ideas come from those moments that are definitely not really set up to create those ideas. You have your finest ideas in the shower or when you're chatting to somebody around the coffee machine. It's so true. And actually, I guess probably a real metaphor for life in that we spend so much of our times sitting, staring at a screen or communicating to each other through screens. I always feel it's so much more effective to get face to face. If you can ever do that, you have a much more productive conversation where ideas tend to be generated more easily.
Yeah, it is. And, recently I think people have obviously started using Zoom and all these tools a little bit more to try and do meetings, but there's nothing like the face-to-face meeting where, you just get the feeling from the guys that you're talking to. I think it's much easier in person than you're doing it on a Zoom call, because on a virtual call, you always feel like there's a time limit, there's time pressure. You don't necessarily feel that when you're talking face to face.
I think that's so true. I mean, Formula One is a hugely technical sport. And if I go back to my time at McLaren and even before that, I think most of the focus in the sport was all on the technical side. But everything you're describing here is much more focused on the human side. Formula One is an industry built around humans, of course. None of the technical stuff happens without the brilliant humans at each of these teams. Do you feel that, even as a driver, do you feel like there's more focus on people and making people happy and more fulfilled in their roles within the world of Formula One than there ever used to be?
It feels that way. Also because the Formula One calendar just keeps expanding, and, the mechanics here, the whole team is traveling week in, week out. They don't spend a lot of time at home. So I feel like there's been a lot of emphasis put on their mental well-being as well, because it's not easy to travel the world constantly and being away from your family for so long. Yes, we have an amazing opportunity, and everyone that is working in this paddock absolutely loves it, and they're all passionate about the sport, and that's why they do it, first of all. But you can really feel that teams are really trying to take care of the personnel, because it is challenging for them. They're kind of the real heroes of this sport, let's say, that don't necessarily get that much credit for it. So it's important that the team is looking after them. They get certain perks and make sure that they're happy in their position.
Yeah, it's so true. And ultimately that translates into performance. We're running out of time, so I want to wrap this up with you giving us your one or your biggest pit lane life lesson that's come from your career in motorsport and particularly Formula One that we can pass on to people listening at home that they might be able to utilize in their own lives, if you can think of something.
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is don't take anything for granted. And if you want something, it's not just going to come towards you. I think you always got to work for something and you got to earn it. And yeah, I think it's important if you want something from someone, just pick up the phone, give them a call. It might not do anything immediately, but it might help you in the future. And I think, sometimes in motorsport, that's how driver contracts get done, because of the odd call that you've done. And it wasn't meant to be talking about any contracts or something, but people appreciate it when you pick up the phone, just have a small conversation with them. And I think that might sometimes help you out in the long run.
I think that's great advice. Yeah, it's I've never met anybody who's successful in any area of life that hasn't had to work hard at some point. There's no substitute for it. And seizing those opportunities is absolutely key. You're absolutely right. You've done it in your own career and it's led to a very long and I think successful Formula One career. I know that your time at McLaren was difficult, but even you've just described today how those difficult years at McLaren have taught you so much more that you've gone on to now utilise in other categories of racing very successfully. World champion in Formula E, of course, let's not forget. And you're still operating in the sport at a team that is building something that I think is going to be impressive in the future. So congratulations. Exactly. Thank you very much for your time today, Stoffel. Really appreciate it. It's always great to chat to you. And I'll see you soon.
Thank you. See you soon.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. I thought Stoffel was really eloquent. I thought he was really interesting in some of the things that he said. He's a very thoughtful guy, and you could really see that came across in that he analyses many of those periods of his life, some of which have been very difficult, particularly those years at McLaren, but he's taken something positive from them. He had lots of advice, didn't he, that I think is valuable to all of us, whether we're racing drivers or not. Advice around dealing with pressure. And I was particularly interested in that idea of finding a motivation, no matter what your goals are. If you can't be the massive success, if you can't get to the top of the tree right now, find something else to grasp onto, something else that can motivate you and get you to the next level. He's done that very successfully. He's still doing it now in his role in Formula One at Aston Martin. And I hope that you'll be able to take that away and apply it into your own lives too. I thought it was a great conversation. So thank you to Stoffel and thank you to the Aston Martin Formula One team as well for their time today. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back, of course, very soon with another episode. In the meantime, please don't forget to go and like and subscribe and follow and leave me a comment wherever it is you're consuming this podcast. I will always appreciate it. And in the meantime, don't forget this. Do the right things. Do the things right.